I'm Julie Saunders.
I'm Jan Wilson. Julie and I both have experience as school librarians, and we've worked together as district library leaders.
In each episode, we'll dive into our profession with interviews and meaningful content to inspire you. We're not experts,
but we're pretty close.
The ideas and opinions shared by any host, guest, or listener are their own and do not represent those of any respective school district.
Welcome to Library Exchange.
This episode is sponsored by News-O-Matic. Introducing News-O-Matic, the daily news resource that makes learning exciting and accessible for K-8 students.
With engaging, standards-based lesson plans and articles available in multiple languages, including Spanish, French, Arabic, and Mandarin, News-O-Matic supports diverse learners while building literacy and critical thinking skills.
Interactive features like read-aloud audio, quizzes, and videos make it easy to connect real-world events to the classroom. Give your students the tools they need to stay informed and inspired. Bring News-O-Matic to your school today.
Visit newsomatic.org for more information.
Jan, we're recording.
Yes.
What are you doing?
Well, I wanted to share something that I saw on social media recently, but I can't find it right now.
Well, we're recording right now. You're looking down and scrolling.
Okay, I'm putting my phone down now. I wanted to give credit to a school librarian whose Instagram bio said, "I used to teach in the classroom, but now I teach in the library." So if this belongs to you, please DM our podcast.
That's a great line.
I like it.
Speaking of teaching in the library, our guest today, Jenny Sweat, is a high school librarian in Gwinnett County, Georgia. She's been an educator for 16 years.
Jenny was a middle school librarian for 5 years, and she's been in the high school for 9. She was named the 2015 Library Media Specialist of the Year for her district.
Welcome to Library Exchange, Jenny. We are looking forward to our discussion about information and media literacy today. We know how much you care about having shared values about the accuracy and truthfulness of information.
Thanks so much. I'm excited to be here and talk with you guys.
Well, before we get started with our conversation, Jenny, we wanted to let you describe your school. It's unique, the Gwinnett School of Mathematics, Science, and Technology. It is a high school that is part of a public school system, but it accepts qualified students using a lottery system. So if you can share for our listeners the difference with GSMST and a traditional public high school, your enrollment and grade levels.
Sure. So our high school, GSMST, serves the entire county. So students who are interested in coming to our school, and we are a STEM-focused school, we have kind of an accelerated curriculum. We move through the curriculum pretty quickly. But any students who are interested can apply for this lottery. We usually have close to 1,000 students to 1,500 students applying for the lottery, and we select 400 to 450 to come to our school as freshmen. And then they stay here for the full 4 years. We have about 1,200 students total. So we're one of the smaller high schools in our district, but still a pretty big school. And our kids are really academically focused for the most part.
Okay.
So I'd love to start off by just asking, what do information and media literacy skills actually mean to you?
Sure. Well, I think of media literacy as kind of an umbrella term. It's the skills that students and everybody needs in order to understand this onslaught of information that we constantly have. So whether that's watching a news report, reading an article, coming across a social media post, it's how do we determine if that, whatever it is we're seeing, if that is real or factual information, if you can trust it.
That's very helpful. Thank you. We're really interested in learning more about how you incorporate those information and media literacy skills into your programming, lessons, and activities. But first, why do you believe that information media literacy skills are essential, and why should students develop them?
I really do think that these skills are so absolutely critical, especially at this point. When we think about how society has changed, it used to be, even when I was in high school, it used to be finding information was the tricky thing. We would go to the library, we would try to find books, we would try to find, different materials. And now it's not about finding the material, it's about vetting the material. In this massive onslaught of information that we have, what can we trust? What's going to provide us with the best information out of the, mountain of sources that we have to wade through? And it's gotten to be so incredibly difficult for these kids and really for all of us. We not only have people out there actively trying to, trick you with disinformation and misinformation. We have people trying to sell you stuff. And now we have AI. So this has become an absolutely crucial skill.
Yeah, it's definitely a different skill set that our students have to learn. So in such a large school, it can be challenging to ensure that all students are consistently taught these skills and that you're connected with them throughout the school year. So how do you make sure all students are exposed to lessons on managing information? And do you have a plan that these skills are taught to everyone at some point?
So this is something that I've been kind of grappling with over my time here at my high school. I kind of started it off piecemeal, and I would just jump in once in a while I could, maybe do a little lesson when I taught research to language arts, maybe do a little lesson when I taught science. As I've moved on, I've kind of tried to be more careful and thoughtful as I think about how I want to make sure that we build on these skills every year. So right now we're working on a 4-year plan where we have skills that we start in 9th grade, things that we introduce in 9th grade, and then we build on those skills in 10th grade and then continue to build on them up through 12th grade. So the other thing is it's really important that kids get lots of opportunities to practice these skills, even if it's just a little mini lesson where they're vetting websites and trying to decide, is this website better than this? Or is this article more in-depth and comprehensive than this one? Just that practice helps them become really proficient and comfortable at doing it in the future.
So there are librarians, and I'm on these Facebook groups where I see librarians post different things about their struggles with coming up with lesson ideas. They sometimes will just go through the content area objectives for their district or state and just try to pull things out to do lessons. What are your thoughts about how information literacy lessons can be worked into any lesson?
And I love that you say that because really you have to be sneaking in that information literacy and media literacy skills and skill practice into as many lessons as you can. And it can fit into pretty much whatever content that you're teaching. You can sneak in those skills. I like to try to really follow the instructional calendars, kind of keep an eye on what's coming up. But one of the things that I do just in my own personal time is pay attention to the news and try to see what's going on out here that I might be able to put into a lesson. So if something is happening in chemistry, right now they just developed that new state of matter, right? You guys have heard about that where they're talking about quantum computing and they've developed that new state of matter that's not a solid, liquid, or gas. So to me, that's a really interesting story. It fits well with what they're talking about in chemistry. So maybe we can do a little warm-up activity with that. I can show students a couple of different examples of articles about that and talk about which one of these do we trust? Do we trust this social media post that's talking about that? Or should we look a little deeper and see if we can find a New York Times article or something that's going to give us a little bit more depth into what the story's talking about?
Do you ever teach any of these skills in isolation? I mean, are there some that work well instead of being integrated into an existing lesson?
I think that's a great question. I do some stuff in isolation, and it usually has to do with the news story that comes out. In our district, we have what's called advisement lessons, 20-minute lessons, where we really just have a small amount of time where students can get a little bit of targeted practice in something. So I completely build up a lesson. It's only like a 15, 20-minute lesson. And it has to do specifically with these media literacy skills. So if you think back to, remember when that ship, it was like the Titanic submarine, and there was all this controversy about, did this really happen? Is this true? There was all these misinformation stories. So I found a bunch of TikTok videos and different videos about that. And we looked at what the misinformation was saying. And then we looked into how we could vet that. If we looked into the actual science and what we knew compared to what researchers are actually saying, was what was presented on those articles true or was it fake? And the students got to talk about that. That didn't really have a connection with any subject area. It was just a chance for them to practice those skills. But most of the time, I would say they go hand in hand with a lesson that I'm doing, and I'll just kind of sneak in some of that practice.
Where do you find good examples of misinformation, disinformation, and bias that you would use in your lessons? Do you have places that you go that help you cultivate these lessons?
So this is a tricky thing. Every morning, I check a couple of different news sources. I like to look at Google News. I like to look at Yahoo News just because I think that they handle the news differently. That's actually a lesson I do with students. Let's compare how Yahoo presents the news, how they present advertisements, what's at the top of the page compared to how Google News presents it. It's fun for the kids. I like to look at Broadway musicals. So my Google News has all this information about Broadway musicals, but the kids don't have that. They'll have different stuff like soccer or stuff about a movie star. So we'll look at that and see how Google is targeting stories to them. And that kind of gets us a little taste of like the echo chamber that they could potentially be talking about later. That's one of the things is I pay attention to the news every morning. I consider it my job to be like, let's look at headlines and see, does anything match with a content area that I could talk about or that might be a good media literacy lesson. I will also say that I am kind of addicted to TikTok. I do scroll TikTok a lot. It's not something I'm proud of. I do use a lot of it though, just because a lot of our students are on TikTok and Instagram. And I feel like it's a good place to get ideas of stuff that they'll actually be seeing because I'm so interested in it. TikTok now thinks that I'm a conspiracy theorist. So I get all sorts of conspiracy theory TikToks that I can use as examples. So that's the trick. You follow a couple of conspiracy theories and you like those and you'll start getting more of that type of content. And then you can use that with the kids.
Well, that's easily relatable for them because instead of pushing back on where they get their content, we need to embrace it and use it, which is exactly what you're doing. Can you tell us a little bit about News Literacy Project in Adfontes Media?
Oh, sure. Yeah, so it does get overwhelming. I don't want anybody to think you have to become a news junkie in order to teach this content. There are a lot of programs out there that package this and they do this work for you, and you can just immediately jump in and start borrowing from them, changing it up and putting your own spin on it, or just taking it completely ready to go. News Literacy Project is one of my all-time favorite sources. It's absolutely excellent. They have a whole classroom of resources with complete lessons in there that ask questions of the kids. They have video clips and stuff embedded. They have posters that you can use and print out directly from their website. They have a slideshow called The Sift, which if you haven't signed up for that, I strongly recommend it. And that's pretty much weekly PowerPoint slide deck that'll come out and it'll have actual articles and headlines from that week's news that you can show with students and you can have them kind of walk through it.
Yeah, it's free for educators.
It's free, absolutely free. Adfontes does the same thing. If you haven't used them, it's a free resource. You might be familiar with them even if you haven't heard Adfontes. They're the ones that do that media bias chart that you've probably seen before that ranks all the different sources on that graph. And it's a great source. It's a great activity to have students rank their own sources using their materials. So you could have them do that. But they also do a weekly thing where they'll take a headline and they'll give you several articles. Some of them kind of fall in the middle of their chart, that nonpartisan. Some of them are like more hyperpartisan left or hyperpartisan right or really opinion based. You don't have to tell the kids what they are, but you give the kids the articles and then have them look through and see, where do you guys think this falls? Do you guys think that there's bias in this? What kind of vocabulary are you noticing? Who are they interviewing for this piece? And you get those type of questions and have the kids talk about it. And they start to really pick up on how these articles are being written.
Also on the media bias chart, like it shows the news from TV to articles to podcasts, just a range of different media, correct?
Right. So a lot of our kids don't watch cable news. That's one of the first things I always like to ask kids when we do a lesson about this is who in here is watching the news? And if you're watching the news, how are you watching the news? A lot of them, if they watch cable news, it's just because their parents have it on in the living room while they're, eating dinner or whatever. Kids sometimes will listen to NPR or a news radio on the way in. But the vast majority of them, it is YouTube, it is social media like TikTok or Instagram, Twitter or X. Like we get a lot of that. That's pretty much the only place. Very rarely will they say a mainstream news source, at least here.
I think that's a great perspective to remember that students are getting their information in different places than the adults are, and to customize your lessons around that. That's an important reminder. Language arts is a natural starting point for partnering with teachers. Are there other subject areas where you collaborate to teach information literacy skills?
Yeah, definitely. I think the two easiest ones are science and then also social studies. Science is great because we do a lot with looking at journal articles. And I always tell them that, the most bang for your buck, if you ever want to convince somebody to believe your science fair project is true, you're not going to convince them with a New York Post article from Yahoo News. You want to convince them with a research journal, a published peer-reviewed academic journal. So we talk about how to look at those type of journals and how to read those type of journals. I'll find content that they will kind of match what they're talking about in whatever course. If it's biology, I'll try to find a biology related article, and then we'll go over how to read this scientific journal article, go through all the steps of that. So they tend to really like that, and it's good practice for them to get used to that. And social studies, same thing. There's so much happening in the news. You can compare current events to things that have happened in the past, wars that are happening now, conflicts that are happening now, and how they're presented in that home country. A lot of what we've been doing is looking at how Israel is reporting the news versus how other countries are reporting the news, how Russia is reporting news. A lot of those newspaper articles you can find for free online, and just having the kids be like, okay, let's look and see what the headlines for this country are versus headlines for this country versus how the United States is reporting. And that gives them a really interesting perspective.
Great.
How do you build credibility with your teachers so that they feel comfortable, giving up some of their instructional time to partner with you to bring their students in?
This has been a little bit of a hard-fought battle. So I started off with one or two teachers that knew me and just was like, hey, I've got an idea. Let's try to make this work. And sometimes it was successful and sometimes it was less successful. It's one of those things that's constantly evolving. You have to show that you're working with the teacher and you want to hit the things that they want to hit. When I first started teaching some of these skills, it was more along the lines of me standing up lecturing in front of the class. I would stand up there and be like, these are the databases. Please enjoy these databases and use these databases. As I have gotten more into the practice of teaching research and trying to keep kids' attention and not having kids fall asleep on me, it's kind of changed. It's kind of shifted. So now I know to tell kids, you're not going to start on the databases. We don't want you to start on the databases. We want you to go to Google and do some background reading. If you're going to Google, you have to have those media literacy skills to vet the sources. We want you to make sure that you're choosing the best sources. So how do we start at Google to get those background resources? How are we vetting the Wikipedia articles that we're looking at? Are there enough sources? Like where are they getting their information from? So talking about those skills. And now I'm at the point where hopefully teaching this research is a little bit more fun. So constantly taking teacher feedback, making sure that I'm hitting what they want to hit and trying to make it as entertaining as possible. So I will say, like now, I do a whole thing where I talk about how I think gas stoves are causing asthma for me and my kids, and I'm terrified of gas stoves. And I act like a conspiracy theorist, and I show them a TikTok video of how dangerous gas stoves are. And then I'm like, okay, you guys got to find sources to prove to me that these gas stoves are safe. Otherwise, I'm ripping this out of my house right now. I'm calling the handyman right now. And so they have to find me sources. And then we roast each other. We're like, are you really trying to convince me that I'm safe on the about.com article? You think I'm going to believe about.com with my health? So it becomes more fun and engaging for the kids.
Yeah, and you're probably educating your teachers if they're sitting in there listening to this, because we all need to hear about these skills.
So just then you mentioned how you have evolved as a teacher, which is a learning experience in itself. As we teach over the years, we grow as professionals. How do you add more depth to each grade level so that the students evolve with their information literacy knowledge?
Right. So this is something that is kind of constantly evolving. I mentioned when I'm working with science teachers, we will talk about this is what an academic journal article is. This is what peer review means. This is why this article is really, really good. And that they might get like some basic introduction on how to read that article. Then as we go farther, we'll build on that. We'll be like, okay, you guys know what these academic research articles are. You know why they're good. Let's actually look and see who are the researchers that put this article together. What other research have they done? Let's look and see what their experiment is. So let's dig into the methodology and see who was this experiment done with. Was it done on people? Was it done on animals? How many people was it? How long of the time frame was? So the kids start breaking down even these really high level sources that are supposed to be kind of ironclad and looking at them with a little bit of, a skeptical eye and start to think, is this article, this one peer review journal, is it backed up? Have any other experimenters replicated this result? So thinking about each of those skills, how can we get just a little bit deeper with each of those skills and make sure that kids are really thinking about stuff from every point of view that they can?
Well, Jenny, you have shared so much valuable information with us today. Like you have great tips for school librarians that they can share with their students and their teaching staff.
And really, it's where school librarians can truly showcase their expertise and offer innovative ideas for lessons. This was really amazing. I know there's a lot of school librarians out there listening to this episode, and it's just sparking all kinds of ideas for them. So thank you so much for being a guest with us today.
Oh, thank you so much for having me. I hope it really is exciting to everybody else, because I really do think these skills are so important, and the kids really need them. I mean, it's what we need to have a functioning society is what I really believe. So thank you for the time.
Yeah. Thank you, Jenny. Julie, an important discussion with Jenny Sweat about the role of the librarian with information and media literacy. We exchanged ideas during the interview. It's time for our recap. I'll start.
Okay.
Jenny explains that media literacy involves the skills needed to evaluate the vast amount of information encountered daily, such as news reports, articles, and social media posts. I like to use the word infowhelm to describe how much information our students have access to.
I do love that word. Jenny mentions jumping straight into an academic article and how that is too hard for students. They need the basic skills. This is a common mistake that librarians make. They jump directly into the content. It is always important to build the background knowledge and not assume that students have all the basic skills necessary to be successful with the task. I love that she says this and that it is coming from a librarian working with students from one of the most successful high schools in the nation.
Mm-hmm. Their skill set is different from when we were in school because the challenge is not finding information, but determining its credibility. Mm-hmm. So I really want to emphasize the shift in mindsets. Traditionally, librarians were helping students find the information. Now we're coaching them through determining the trustworthiness of what they found.
So true. Jenny also highlights the importance of giving students frequent opportunities to practice the skills to become proficient and comfortable in evaluating information. Frequency is the key. Frequency allows more depth to be added during the scaffolding process of teaching these skills.
Yeah, she checks multiple news sources daily and uses platforms like TikTok to find relevant examples of misinformation and disinformation. Those are two different things. She searches to find topics or current events that relate to content. And what a valuable step to gain credibility with her teachers and to form a partnership.
Yes, it is. She highlights the importance of evolving her teaching methods to keep students interested and ensure they develop a deep understanding of information literacy over time. Not only does she continue to fine-tune her teaching strategies, she also makes sure that there is added depth of understanding each year as the students progress from grades 9 to 12.
I'm going to get on my soapbox for a minute, but if you don't have a multi-year plan for teaching these strategies, that is something you need to think through as you become familiar with what is taught at certain times of the year. Make yourself a simple calendar of what you notice in the curriculum so that you can prepare for opportunities to partner with teachers. If biomes are taught in October, then in September, you should be seeking resources that will help you teach information literacy skills related to biomes. Think about what opportunities can you offer so that each level of student is building on the prior year's skill set. And you should be intentional about how each grade level is exposed to more depth in these skills. So lastly, you can sneak in media and information skills into any lesson, you guys, regardless of the content. It is not your job to teach the content.
So many librarians browse the content area objectives, confusing the goal of library instruction on information literacy with actually teaching content area objectives. Our focus is on pulling in information and media literacy skills related to the topics being taught in the content areas. It's the job of the certified school librarian to align with all content area topics as they are being taught in the classroom when pulling in information and media literacy skills lessons. Pull in your science and social studies classes, not just language arts. School librarians own that part of a student's education. Students must have the ability to manage the credibility of information in today's world.
I feel like we're doing new librarian training. But seriously, you guys, I want to remind you again of the two resources that Jenny mentioned as we wrap up this episode, the News Literacy Project and Ad Fontes Media. Both websites have ready-made lessons and tools that you can share with students and staff, and they're free.
The bottom line is you can teach whatever you want, but your focus should be on information and media literacy objectives. These skills should be fundamental and integrated into as many lessons as possible.
Librarians, take it, own it, run with it.
Make sure to visit our website at www.libraryexchangepodcast.com.
You'll find episode notes and links. You can even submit your questions or inspiring stories that may be featured on the podcast.
If you're looking for some swag for your library or book-loving friends, visit libraryexchange.etsy.com.
That's a lot of URLs, so I'm glad you had to say all of that, Julie.
Thanks for joining us. We can't wait to have you back for our next episode of Library Exchange.